Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
This week on the pod, we've got Josiah Daniels from Sojourners magazine talking about a recent trip he took to Palestine, of all places. Very interesting. In the episode, Josiah talks about his experience there, talking with activists, all the things that he saw, what he took away, and what he thinks that you can do about any of it. It's a cool interview. It's always great to have Josiah on the podcast. Always good, but this is like an especially exciting one, I think.
I think so too. We didn't do a good job, I'm just realizing now, introducing Josiah on the episode. So I guess we should do that really quickly for a minute. Josiah, he is an editor at Sojourners magazine, and Matt and I have both worked with him in the past on articles and other things. A great guy all around. And we went to undergrad together at a very weird evangelical school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a long time ago. Man, so long ago now. And really cool to see Josiah kind of find different ways to explore social justice at Sojourners. I feel like he's a great voice in the mix there, and good to have him back. People might be interested to listen to the episodes he did with us in the past. I think he's done 2, maybe 3 with us previously.
Yeah.
Always fun to listen to him talk about whatever wild thing that he's investigating or exploring in the world. And also, I think a really good sign for the future of Christian progressive media, such as it is, that people like Josiah are out there in the mix. So, that's some great news. And one other piece of that, I guess, is if you're out there and you're looking for stuff to support, I think Sojourners is one of them. It's an increasingly small pool of Christians out there willing to publish stuff about Palestine that's good, and it's great that Josiah is making that happen.
Cool. Let's go to Josiah.
Welcome back to the show, Josiah. You've been on before in the past promoting things you've written for Sojourners, telling us all about how he gets us and whatever else we've talked to you about in the past. But this time, it's a little different. And we are really glad to have you on during Advent in particular, because you recently got back from a trip to Palestine hosted by Sabeel. People who listen to the show for a while will remember that we had Jonathan Kitab from Fosna on the show a long time ago, and been reading a lot of Sabeel folks in the last year. So it's really exciting to be able to just kind of chat with you and hear about what you learned, what's going on. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. But before we get in too deep, tell us how this trip happened. Why did you decide to go? And what's the deal with Sabeel?
What's the deal with Sabeel? I love that. First off, let me just say thanks for letting me come on. I really appreciate it. I'm always excited to be able to hang out with you all and talk about weird, fun, Christian leftist stuff. So, but I also wanted to just say really quick, they found Luigi. Will they ever find Mario? And my guess is they will find Mario at a Burger King. Okay, I just want to throw that out there. But back to the task at hand.
He's jumping on mushrooms. Who knows what kind of yucky stuff he's up to?
I had been aware of Sabeel. Sabeel is an organization that Sojourners has covered for many years before I was there. Actually, funny enough, Brian McLaren wrote a piece for the magazine about Sabeel. But I found out about this because one of the authors that I work with, Matt Vega, he text messaged me on September 18th and said, hey, there's this trip that's coming up. It's had to be rescheduled multiple times. And so some people have had to drop out. Do you know of anybody who would be interested in going? And immediately I thought to myself, oh, wow, like it would be really great to go back. I went to Israel, Palestine in 2012, funny enough, with the university that Dean and I are associated with. That's a different story. But I'd been once before. I really did want to go again, but just like at this point in my life, didn't know if it would be able to work out. And so I told him that I would ask a few other people. Spoke about it with my wife, and she said, you have to go. And so then that made me think to myself, okay, well, maybe I should try and go. Of course, we were leaving at that point in less than a month. I found out about this on September 18th. We were supposed to be leaving on October 10th. This was also during a time where Iran and Israel were sort of escalating things. And so, yeah, I mean, there were just a lot of things that were up in the air. But I committed to go, and I'm very grateful that everything ended up falling into place and working out, and I was able to go and spend some time with people over at Sabeel. So that's kind of the long and the short of how the trip came together.
Okay, this might sound like a boring question, and if it is a boring question, we'll move right along. But what were the logistics like of traveling there? I mean, it's like, an active war zone, genocidal, crazy situation. What was it like? Just even like was the travel itself like tenuous? Was it did it feel like an adventure? Did it feel terrible? What was it like?
Of course, it was tenuous and terrible, and it all felt like an adventure. I mean, that's like one of the exciting things about travel is you don't always know what's going to happen. But specifically as it pertains to how we got into Palestine, the way that we did, we were traveling as a group, and it was primarily, I was kind of the exception. It was a group of Black Christian, and there were some people who did not identify as Christian, but it was a group of faith leaders and activists, specifically with like a focus on Palestine. And so we all got to Jordan, and instead of like flying into Israel and landing in Tel Aviv and going in that way, what we did was we drove in, and that was a bit easier. Although, I mean, you guys have been through TSA, you know how it goes. I mean, it's very, people are deeply suspicious of you. And I mean, it was no exception when we were traveling from Jordan into Israel. That is the way that I would recommend personally. But yeah, it was still very much so a difficult journey. There's an incredible amount of surveillance, and you feel that everywhere. I mean, there's cameras everywhere. Uh, your bag, like for me personally, when I put my bag through the conveyor belt and was expecting it to come out the other side, it had disappeared, and I didn't get it back until like after waiting for a long period of time, and then it appeared, and there was no explanation for why my bag had disappeared. So I mean, yeah, it was an interesting experience in that way.
Talk a little bit more about how this trip came together, because you were just saying, the folks who went are coming from a racialized kind of background and
Yeah,
responding also to Sabeel's call for people to go even during
yeah.
such a challenging time. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about like how that trip came together. Why is Sabeel kind of calling people to come? Why did your group in particular decide to go? What are some of the dynamics involved there?
Yeah. So Sabeel specifically wants to work with they specifically wanted to work with African Americans in the United States, who could then go back to their communities and talk about some of the ways that the oppression of the Palestinians matches in some degree the oppression that Black people are experiencing here in the United States. And like for me personally, I remember back in 2014 being involved in the initial Black Lives Matter protests. And one of the things was, from Ferguson to Palestine. So those ideas have been percolating for a really long time. And so Sabeel, which is a Christian organization dedicated to nonviolence, a liberation theology organization, um, that was actually started by Naim Atik, who is a Palestinian liberation theologian. But Sabeel wanted to invite faith leaders and activists, specifically Black faith leaders and activists, to come and see. That's like one of the things that they say, right? Come and see, go and tell. Um, Now, I'm not a faith leader, and I don't really consider myself an activist. I consider myself to be a journalist and a writer. And so it was interesting for me to be on the delegation because, like I'd said at the top, it's like I was more so filling in for someone. Like I don't know necessarily if uh I don't know necessarily like if I fit the mold. But as someone who uh deeply cares about issues in Palestine, I knew I wanted to go. And so they welcomed me, and it was a great opportunity, and I learned a lot, and we had a lot of fun.
That's cool. It seems so intense to hear you talk about it, and maybe amping up some of that intensity. What was it? Just, I mean, Palestine is a thing that people are thinking about everywhere right now. Whether it's solidarity or like protests in our own various countries, whatever. But what was it like to actually be, on the ground in a place like Palestine while and a lot of genocides being carried out against its people, while tensions are ratcheting up between Iran and Israel? Like, what was that like? What was the energy of the situation?
Yes, and I am glad too that you used the language there of genocide because I think that's something that Westerners are hesitant to do. But I do think it's important to speak plainly about it. I don't know if you all saw the recent Amnesty International report that came out that is specifically saying that what is happening specifically in Gaza by the state of Israel is genocide. And so I do think it's important to talk about it in that way. To your point about, or to your question about like what was it like being there? Um, I love I love to be in places that uh there's a little bit of stress. You don't really like ever know like what's going to happen. And I think one of the things that's interesting about being in Israel, Palestine, and for a lot of the time we spent in Jerusalem. We did spend time in the West Bank. We spent time in Ramallah. We spent time in Hebron, but we spent a lot of time in Jerusalem. And when you're in Jerusalem, you're like, there's a war going on. Like you don't have any concept that there's something wrong happening in the country. I mean, like one night I remember I was trying to fall asleep in my hotel and there was like a dance party happening just like down the street from where our hotel was. We stayed in the Christmas hotel. And so I like woke up and I was journaling and I was, writing like there is a full-on genocide happening in this country, and people are dancing and like living it up. There's like a full-on nightlife. And so there's like that dichotomy that's always present. And then just like on another level too, uh, you will meet people. And one of the things that I love, again, about this part of the world is it's not weird to immediately start talking about religion. Like everyone is eager to get into ultimate concerns. And it's not weird to like be sitting and having this like extremely deep, intimate conversation with someone you've known for 10 minutes. And they're telling you these incredible details about their life. They're telling you how they survive, just on a daily basis. And so that's interesting too. It's like you would think that people would be really like kind of like closed off and people would be understandably just mainly concerned about surviving. But there's like an openness and a hospitality there that is just so contagious. That's the only way that I can describe it. And so that's kind of like what it's like on the ground a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, these kind of situations are always full of contradictions, and it's good to name a few of those. And maybe say a little bit more too about what were your thoughts leading up to going? I mean, you mentioned your wife was like, "You gotta go."
Yeah.
Great, good on her. Lots of partners probably wouldn't have that immediate reaction to the idea that their partner is going to go to a place that is in the news for a lot of rough stuff. And
Yeah.
how did you kind of process that? You wrote a piece for Sojourners preceding that trip. kind of just talking about the dangers happening there and also the importance of going there as a U.S. tax-paying citizen. And I think it's especially interesting just to hear some of that process of kind of leading up to it, because solidarity travel is always a little bit different than tourism, but it also has some kind of weird overlaps with tourism. And it's difficult to process all of that stuff around like the thought of like, it's important for me to go, but also you have the privilege of going and leaving, and how to kind of make the most of that. So what are your kind of processes going to the leading up to that trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important for me to say here, like, I really had no intention of going because I'm a coward. Like I was like, that's nice. I'll try and find some people who want to go. And so, you know, yeah, I didn't necessarily have any intention of going. And maybe I'm gonna admit some other stuff here too that doesn't make me look that great, but whatever. Yeah, I mean, I pay taxes. The United States, I think it's like $8.7 billion in military aid to the state of Israel. I'm a taxpayer. I'm assuming some of your listeners are taxpayers, although you guys are getting pretty international. So, there are probably some folks who are not paying money to our military. But yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing for me, and the thing that maybe, I know you guys have been talking about being cranky lately, and maybe I'm going to be a little cranky here, but it's all directed at
Crab
myself.
season.
Yeah, it's crab season. I'm really suspicious of the language of solidarity now, especially as a United States citizen. I think that I have some serious reservations. Again, I'll just talk about myself. I'm hard pressed to say that I stand in solidarity with Palestinians, in no small part because I'm a taxpayer. I'm paying so that they can, you know, I'm paying taxes, and my taxes are going to bomb them. And I think that we just have to be like that explicit about it. And so sometimes I think what happens, especially if you're a U.S. citizen and you're a person of consciousness, and like, I don't want to disrespect people who genuinely want to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. I genuinely want to stand in solidarity with Palestinians too. But I think sometimes we like we get big heads about this, and we think to ourselves, oh, because I'm, going over, or because I'm, posting on social media, or because I'm hashtag, holding space in some way for Palestinians, that I'm standing in solidarity with them. And it's like, no, not for me. That's not really how I view it. I view it purely at this point in my life. I view it as not so much standing in solidarity, but standing as a witness saying, this is what I'm seeing. And then part of being a witness, of course, is telling people what you see. And as a journalist, this is great for me because that's what I do. I tell people, the things that I'm seeing. Um, but yeah, so like pre-trip, I struggled with, how am I going to think about, you know, me going over here, because I don't just want to be a tourist, but I'm also not going to give in to like these ideas of grandeur and portray myself as, somehow like Malcolm X going to Mecca or something, which is an awesome story, by the way. If your listeners don't know about that, read that in his autobiography. He went to Mecca, it changed his life completely. He became an internationalist. But so all that to say, yeah, I mean, like, I struggled with me going before because I'm a coward, and I am a, taxpayer, and I have, serious apprehensions about, thinking of myself as someone who's standing in solidarity with Palestinians when I'm an American. And I'm still struggling with some of those things, even now, after the trip. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I hear you. Those apprehensions are always interesting to hear someone flesh out, especially on a podcast. Appreciate the vulnerability. Very cool of you to do that. I wonder though. Well, okay, let's talk more about the Sojourners piece that you had written beforehand, because I think it gets to some of these themes in a really interesting way. You said solidarity. It seems like maybe too big headed of a word. I feel you. I understand that. Seeing people post constantly about solidarity with Palestine on social media is like a little bit eye rolling sometimes. Like, what are you really doing? Okay, I don't know. A great question. But you do like the idea of the word witness. And there's even this part in your piece for Sojourners where you're like, well, what if I was there, not just to witness the suffering, but also witness like something cool happening. Like what if like a big wall fell down and, and something great and liberatory happened? I don't know. I wonder what stories like that do you have about your trip? Was there anything that you saw that was like really amazing that wasn't just witnessing the carnage of the situation, but like witnessing the real beauty of humanity or liberation or whatever we'd call it?
Totally. That's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things too that's like really tempting as an American who cares about, you know, social justice in the world, a lot of the news that's coming out of Palestine right now is absolutely terrifying. And so there's this assumption sometimes, I think, on our part that it's like everybody there is depressed. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Everybody there is depressed, but also people are resilient. And one of the things that we constantly heard on our trip from all of the people that we spoke with who were working for Palestinian liberation. So that's not only Palestinians, but it's also Israelis who are conscientious objectors, but one of the things that we constantly heard was existence is resistance. Simply existing right now is a way to resist the forces of death. And so that like really reframes your thinking in terms of like not just what it means to resist, but also what it means in terms of, I guess, thinking about it's not just what am I trying to say? It's not just a situation where you have to do these maybe big acts of like protest, but you can do these sort of like quiet, intentional things that act as a way to resist the occupation. Let me give you an example. Okay, so one of the places that we went is Silwan, and so this is a place where it's believed that that Jesus was. So this is like the pool of Siloam in the Bible, where Jesus heals the man with the blind man. Okay, so this is primarily a Palestinian city, but it's slowly but surely being taken over by settlements. And this is also like where the state of Israel is attempting to build the city of King David. If you've not read The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, this is something that he talks about in the book. It's sort of like using archaeology as a proof text for colonization. But so we went there, and Omar Harami, who is the director of Sabeel, incredible guy, I have to say. And when he listens to that, he'll get a little bit of a chuckle because I really did give him a hard time for most of the trip. There was never a point where I did not have my recorder in his face. But Omar decides that he's going to take us to a house there in Silwan, a Palestinian family's house that has been partially destroyed. And we go and we listen to these folks speak to us. And dude, it was depressing. It was depressing. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to continue on in the trip. I mean, it was just that heavy. Omar could feel that everyone in the group was like, dude, this is really, really heavy. Like, I don't know. And in just like an instant, Omar was like, he heard that there were kids playing soccer. And so he takes our group, all of our old asses, there's 11, 12 of us. He takes our group and he asks these kids who are playing soccer if we can play a soccer game with them. And so then for like the next half an hour in our clothes, we're just like none of us had exercise clothes on. We were all like, dressed to like be out in public. And we're playing soccer with these kids who are like 13, 14, 15 years old. And just again, that dichotomy of like, okay, on the one hand, here is this like awful situation that is getting worse by the minute. Um, and then on the other hand, here are these kids who are playing soccer and still determined to have some sense of normalcy and have some sense of like enjoyment all the while they're being, uh, they're under occupation. So does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder if you could even say a little bit more about kind of exploring the region and kind of understanding some of the differences in context too, because I think, oftentimes, whatever, the news cycle is confusing. Some people have just enough time to know that there's a genocide going on, and others have more time to kind of dig into, the history of the region and what's happening, etc. And for example, like sometimes people I talk to will kind of assume that, the entirety of Palestine is basically Gaza, right?
Yeah.
And I think it might be interesting for people to hear a little bit more too about the what it was like for you to walk through the kind of occupied territories of Palestine and to be in
Yeah.
Jerusalem and to just kind of get a sense of like, Palestinians are divided into so many different kinds of experiences with relation to a Zionist state. And maybe you could just say a little bit more about that. What are some of those contextual differences that you're observing, and how might people kind of better understand a little bit like what are the unique contours of Israeli domination in that region?
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you about, I guess there's kind of a few different ways to answer that. So we went to Hebron, which is unique because like oftentimes settlements are like built on like outskirts or like on hilltops. In Hebron, which is part of the West Bank, Hebron, the settlers are coming into the city and kicking people out of their homes. Also, I would encourage people to look up the work of the community peacemaker teams, which was previously Christian peacemaker teams, but they changed the name, which I'm very happy about personally. But community peacemakers teams, they do great work in Hebron, and so definitely look them up. But so uh, on the one hand, there's Hebron, which is like also where the Ibrahimi mosque is, and in 1994 there was a situation there where there was a massacre by a Zionist who's actually from New York. Um, that massacre killed 29 people. And then that is when, in 94, that is when the occupation there really started to become even more sort of tightened. Um, and so, on the one hand, there's Hebron, which is filled with settlers. It is very much so also a place where IDF soldiers are everywhere. Um, and then on the other hand, there's a place like Ramallah, which is still in the West Bank. But Ramallah is a bit different. There is a bit more space for Palestinians to operate. Um, Now, the reason that I bring that up is because there are times, like when I was in Hebron, I was like, this feels so oppressive. Like I feel like if we weren't here, for example, our guides would be arrested in prison, you know. Whereas in Ramallah, you can walk around and you see Palestinian flags flying, and you're like, oh, okay, you know, this is different. And so I think sometimes too, like there's this temptation to flatten everything when it comes to Israel Palestine, and there's this desire to say sometimes Westerners have this desire to be, oh, it can't be that bad. And my thing always is like, well, where are you going and who's sort of like offering you a guide or offering you a tour? Because I think that that will make a substantial difference. You know, if you go to Hebron, you are going to feel the occupation in every which way, you know. Whereas if you're in Jerusalem and you are with a Palestinian friend or a guide, you're going to have a little bit more freedom to operate, especially if you're in East Jerusalem, which is primarily populated by Palestinians. That said, it's not unusual. This is something that I saw. Uh, Anyone can walk up to a Palestinian and say, "Show me your papers." That can happen anywhere. And that is a very terrifying experience, you know? Um, and so that would be kind of like a little bit, I would say, what it felt like in terms of the different places, how people sort of like negotiate the different areas. Yeah.
That difference is interesting. What you said about like people flattening out Palestine and sort of like the ongoing situation in Gaza to be all of Palestine is complicated. I mean, people in the United States, people in the UK, people generally are bad at geography. So I appreciate all of that. Extremely helpful, actually. Pretty good stuff. You mentioned being with the community peacemaker teams who are very cool. I had an acquaintance who did that once for, I don't know, a summer or something. And it seems like such an intense experience. It seems like you get to spend a lot of time with lots of different activists and journalists, activists, and people who are just, somewhere in between. What did you learn? I don't know. What was your takeaway from being with them and being in that space? Are there any stories that really stick out to you from that experience?
Yes. So one person that I do want to give a shout out to is Hind Shrede. I should say Hind Shreda, I think is the way. But so the way you spell Hind's name is HindShrayDeh. And she has a Twitter account that maybe you guys can put in this show notes. But human rights defender and a journalist. One of the things that I had no idea about that I only learned after listening to Hin's presentation was administrative detention. Administrative detention, and I love the way that she described this. She was talking about it as, it's like it's Kafka-esque. Like basically what happens is it is an arbitrary detention of Palestinians. And so they're detained for reasons that they have no knowledge of, and they're often detained secretively, and they can be detained for however long the state of Israel deems it appropriate. 972 reported on this too. The journalist Baker Zobi reported on this back in January. I encourage people to look that up. But so spending time with him, listening to her talk about administrative detention and sharing with us photos of prisoners who have been in prison for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And they're not just men, they're also women. And they're not just old people, right? They're young people who have just graduated college. So that was really transformative. Um, And then this was one of my favorite experiences, and I really felt extremely honored to be able to sit in this person's presence and listen to them talk about their aunt. But Larine Abu Akla is the niece of Shireen Abu Akla, who was the Palestinian American journalist who was working for Al Jazeera and was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, allegedly accidentally, while reporting on a raid in Jenin. And so Larine, who again is the niece of Shireen, but Larine works for Sabeel, and so I like got to like spend time with her and talk with her about Lorraine's doing journalism too. And then just listening to her talk about her aunt, not necessarily as a journalist, although that's really awesome. But just listening to her talk about her aunt as a human being, as someone who would not just go out of her way to report on a great story, but go out of her way to show someone human kindness. That was really cool to be able to spend time with Lorraine. So yeah.
Yeah, tell us maybe a little bit more about Sabeel and the kinds of characters and folks and work that you encountered there. Sabeel being a bit of a center of gravity for Palestinian liberation theology in the region, and just about last week or maybe even less time past, the heads of the churches in Jerusalem released another letter. There's been a lot of kind of
Yeah.
proactive communiques coming out from many sectors of Christianity in Palestine. And Sabeel, of course, plays a sort of unique role in all of that. So tell us more about that. What's going on with Palestinian liberation theology now? How are they kind of interpreting, making sense of this situation, and what's it like to be a Christian navigating all of that in Palestine?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Sabeel is so incredibly interesting. What I'll say first is Sabeel actually is the Arabic word for water, or also the way, as far as I understand it. And so they adopted this name because early on Christians were called people of the way. And also water is such a critical commodity there in this section of the world that they wanted to give water to people. But I knew vaguely about Seville, but I really didn't know. I didn't know that they were founded by Naim Atik. I didn't know that they were doing sort of like all of this on the ground, uh, all this on the ground justice work. One of the things that really impressed me about Sabeel is they have connections with people not just in the Christian world, but like we were able to go to the Dome of the Rock as a primarily Christian group. We were able to go to the Dome of the Rock because Sabeel has partnerships with people who are Muslim. Um, we were able to speak with Israeli conscientious objectors because, again, Sabeel has relationships with these people. And so I think sometimes, like, at least for me, like, I can be kind of skeptical when organizations say, here's all of this like great stuff that we're doing and like we're connected in all these ways. I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, you're gonna have to show me that. Sabeel is very, very connected. And they are extremely committed. I really want to emphasize this because this is something that was emphasized to me by Sabeel, and so I want to emphasize this to all the listeners. Sabeel is committed to the way of nonviolence, and they are committed to obviously making sure that Palestinians are free, but they also understand that the only way for they understand that Palestinians being free also means that Jews and Israelis living in the region, they'll be free too. And so that was really interesting uh, to sit and to like learn like, wow, here are all of these connections that this organization is making with a variety of people. And to the point about like how they sort of approach specifically like Christianity again in the United States. For me personally, when I think of Christian organizations, I think of these organizations that are primarily just like focused on Christians. But Sabeel is very much so focused on interreligious dialogue, and figuring out a way to not just like build a better version of Christianity, not just like build a better version of the church, but how to create a society that is built on peace and justice. And that really impressed me.
It's such an interesting thing. I mean, on this podcast, we bend over backwards to find like every guy from the 1970s who wrote about liberation theology. But, hearing you talk about Sabeel and like what's going on in Palestine and just like the way that they're operating, there are a whole bunch of people, not just guys, who are doing liberation theology like now in Palestine. I think that's, I don't know. The irony of our podcast of being people interested in this particular niche subject means that like we're going to miss things or whatever. But it's just such an interesting thing that liberation theology is alive and well in another part of the world, and maybe we should pay more attention to it.
I should say too, sorry, I should just say one piece that I would recommend reading, and I think that this is actually available if you just like search this on Google, but this is a piece written by the brother theologians, which I love to be able to say that, but John S. Munayer and Samuel S. Munayer. And the name of this article is Decolonizing Palestinian Liberation Theology, New Methods, Sources, and Voices. This was published in 2022. But if you want to get an idea of kind of the direction that Palestinian liberation theology is going, that's one that I highly recommend.
Cool. Yeah, great to shout that out. I wonder, you've been at Sabeel, you spent time with all these, this big interesting community in Palestine, and now you're back here, for better and for worse. This is where your family is, so I guess that's great. But it's a cool thing to experience, and you have to come back to the United States. What I guess are there things from their spiritual practice, from their activist practice, from just being around them that you are trying to bring back in your own life, in your own spiritual practices in any ways that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, spiritual practices. I think that is so important, even for someone like me who doesn't necessarily pray. Something that I do like to do, and that I did every day that I was in Palestine, was I listened to John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme," and that's just like 33 minutes jazz album, and I feel like that personally for me kind of helped me get into the right mindset to approach the day. Now, for other folks, like we went to church while we were there, and one of the things that's really important is music. Another one of the things that's really important is food. I mean, now I don't know how much that's like a spiritual practice, but sharing a meal with people, that was something that was always very important. One thing that I do want to tell you about, and this is kind of going back to Silwan, art is extremely important. And so like one of the ways I think that, and this is so cool because I think this is getting both at the spiritual and also like the physical world, and it is not just a symbolic thing, but it is a way to emphasize justice. But I don't know, have you guys ever heard of Eyewitness Silwan? If you've ever seen, and that's what it is. So for people who want to look it up, look up Eyewitness Silwan. And the premise is really basic, right? So like I said, there are these settlers who are attempting to push these Palestinian people out of their homes. Of course, the IDF is also there occupying the space. And artists and activists have decided that what they will do, this is so cool, you got to look this up, but they paint eyes, like, so just like this section, they paint eyes of thinkers, philosophers, activists, journalists. Actually, Shireen Abu Akleh is one of the people whose eyes they've put on the sides of these buildings. And so then what you have, right, is you have all of these eyes. James Baldwin's one of them. I think actually Sigmund Freud is too. But you have all of these eyes looking out to see the settlements, to see the IDF, occupying the area. And so it's like, it's on the one hand, this way, art as it goes, is this way to spiritually make sense or wrestle with the reality of our world. And on the other hand, it's like very much so a way that activists are saying, like, we're watching you, our ancestors are watching you, the whole world is watching you. So that's one thing. Now, I'm not saying that like I'm gonna paint or anything. I didn't come back to the United States, an artist or anything like that. But it's just small things like that where I think that you come back and you think to yourself, okay, no, okay, I can't paint, but what is maybe something that I can do, some small spiritual thing that I can do that that would promote justice for the Palestinian people. For me, that's writing. For other folks, it's going to be different things. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. We're kind of inching toward the end of the hour here, but I wonder, you've gone to sea and now you're back and you're telling. And I'm sure, being a person who is in Palestine in a pretty bizarre moment in global history as well is pretty interesting. The presidential election happened, lots of talks about the consequences of that in the region. And now you're, also getting ready to kind of deal with all of that living in the United States. And I wonder, coming back from Palestine, what are you feeling going into the kind of political struggles that people in the US will have to face? And also, what do you think people in the US ought to know about Palestine, as we kind of prepare to make a transition from one genocidal supporting government to another genocidal
Right.
supporting government?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just one of the things that really stood out to me was the way that Palestinians talked about resistance. It didn't have to be, marching in the street. It could be something as simple, as spiritual as acknowledging your existence. You're a human being, in this world. Um, I think though the other thing that I think about quite often is something that Reverend Munter Isaac said, and this is what I think I would most want people to know, especially US citizens to know about Palestinians. But Reverend Munter Isaac, he is the pastor of Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, and he emphasized to us that Palestinians are human beings just like us. Okay. And the fact that they're suffering does not make them exceptionally noble or exceptionally heroic. Um, Palestinians are regular people, and it's because of that that we should be speaking out against the violence of Israel. I think sometimes, especially again with people, I think who have good intentions, people who care about justice, there can be this romantic. We can romanticize uh, people who are struggling against powerful forces. And I think the thing that really stuck out to me about my time in Palestine, and the thing that I came back determined to emphasize, is that these people are just people, and we are doing this. We're doing this to them, and it's an incredible injustice. But the idea that somehow like their suffering makes them, stronger, or makes that, I think we really have to get rid of that, and we need to critique that sort of philosophy anywhere we find it.
It's a good word, and important, especially for those of us on the left. I think it's a good thing to sit with. Going into Advent, we're all getting ready to imagine Bethlehem while there are real people still living there. And I wonder if maybe to kind of round out the conversation, I mean, could you say a little bit more about that as we prepare for that kind of Christmas time?
Yeah.
What would be the message you'd want to leave people with having been to the so-called Holy Land?
Yeah, man. I mean, the message that I would want to leave people with. Well, this actually makes me think of something that you guys were talking about on your last episode about social death. There is a cynicism right now, I think, about peace, And now when I say peace, like I don't mean it like the liberals often do, where it's like there's no conflict, and no one's going to, be angry at one another. But I think that the thing that I was personally really challenged by during my time in Palestine was that Palestinians believe that they are going to see peace in their lifetime. Peace and justice, right? Those two things have to go together. And to hear someone like Omar constantly talk about how, you know, he was going to be someone who had the opportunity to see that peace and justice come to fruition, that really makes me, I think, more hopeful in terms of what we can accomplish together as people who care about creating a society built on peace and justice. Because, again, as an outsider looking in, and then, being there as one of the things that Omar said that was so hilarious was he was like, you Americans, you come, all you want to do is talk about hope, and he was like, we're not in a place of hope right now. But he wasn't saying that that means that they're in a permanent place of despair. What he was saying was you have to sit with the reality, right? You have to face things as they are. But just because you're facing things as they are doesn't mean that you don't believe that you'll win, And that was the thing. That was the thing that Omar was always talking about, that he believed that, that they were going to win. And why? Why did he believe that? Because they have justice on their side, and that to me was just really encouraging in a lot of ways and challenging in a lot of ways. And so, as we get ready to, celebrate the birth of justice, in the person of Jesus, as we get ready to celebrate that, that's something that I'll be thinking about, during Christmas.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes a lot of sense. Josiah, what's coming next for you? You have all this information, or all this. You had this big experience in Palestine. You wrote this kind of like before piece. Um, is there another Sojourners piece coming after this that we should be on the lookout for?
Yes, well, the main thing that I would like to do next is I would like to go to this bone church,
We
because
all we all want to be at the Bone Church. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear that
One day we
bones
all
are
will
their
be.
money. Yes, I mean, I need to get in there. You guys, Matt, you said your son said it sounded cool, and I gotta agree with him. You guys were acting like you were afraid, not me. I'm going in there. That seems like the most metal thing in the world to me.
You can
So
say that all you want, Josiah, but when you are standing in
I
front of
guess
the
I got to
bones,
go with it.
I promise you will not feel that way.
I guess you're right about the one that you described looking like the Grim Reaper. I won't lie, I was like, that's in a church.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean
that's
it's cool. It's cool. Don't get me wrong, but it's also deeply unsettling. It's maybe the
okay.
weirdest
But
thing.
so like I said though, what's coming next for me is I need to get there. So I need to get to Rome, and I need to look and see what's going on there, and see if it's uh, as metal and also as scary as you guys described it. But no, in all seriousness, I have an interview coming out with Reverend Munther Isak. That's going to be published on the Reconstruct on January 7th. So people can be looking for that. I will have another piece about my experience while in Palestine. And I'm not sure when that is going to come out. But I'll be sure to let you all know. Um, One thing that I want to say too, and I'm trying to be self-critical here, but then also I don't know if other journalists and editors and publishers, if they listen. One of the things that we need to do here in the West, specifically in the United States, is we need to give Palestinian people the opportunity to talk about their experience on our various publications and platforms. Again, people talk a lot about solidarity. They post a lot about it on social media. They go to a protest and say, yeah, I'm standing in solidarity. And again, to a certain extent, I understand that and I accept that. And if you believe that that is solidarity for you, great. Okay. And at the same time, I want to challenge you to expand your understanding of that a little bit. And I want to ask you the question, if you are not actively working to form partnerships with Palestinians and allow them to narrate their own stories, what does your solidarity amount to? Okay. And this is something that Sojourners needs to improve on, right? We need to do a better job of publishing Palestinian voices and covering issues pertaining to the genocide that's happening right now. So I just want to throw that out there, but yeah, that's a little bit about what's coming next for me.
Thanks, Josiah. A good note and a good challenge to us also to end on. Maybe a last question. If people want to get involved with Sabeel, how do they do that? Let's say someone heard you talking and they're like, I feel sort of called or pulled to see this for
Yeah.
myself, to come and see, as Sabeel is inviting people to do. How can they do that? And how can people continue to support the work of Palestinians there?
Yeah, I mean, you can always donate. You can always donate to Sabeel, and then there are also volunteer opportunities. And I have to be honest and say I don't fully understand how the volunteer opportunities work. However, you can go to their website and you can email folks there to ask. And then in terms of your other question was how to support if you cannot say your other question again for me. Sorry.
No, you got it. You answered it already. I think,
Okay.
folks who maybe are just interested in what you had to say and inspired, and maybe want to explore that, or explore how to support Sabeel, they can find that on the Sabeel website. And yeah, we'll put a link also to the Friends of Sabeel North America again in our show
Yep.
notes, and people can connect. Great to have you back again, Josiah. I'm glad you went. Glad you came back. Looking forward to seeing how you continue to process that, and looking forward to having you again next time in the future after you've done something else that's wild and written something cool
Yes.
about it.
No, I'm grateful for you guys, and I also just want to say this is completely unscripted, but I do want to just speak directly to your listeners right now. Uh, Matt and Dean, they're great guys. They've been in this struggle for a long time. If you have been listening to this podcast and you are not signed up to be a Patreon supporter, do it. Just, support them. Even if it's just like $1 a month. Anything helps. And so support them in their work. That would be what I encourage you to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Josiah. This guy's always closing. That's a note that we really got to learn, Matt and I. Really appreciate you bringing us some good entrepreneurial energy at the end here. That's
Oh,
great.
yeah. That's what I am. I'm an entrepreneur. What can I say? Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate this. And again, thanks so much for your work.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. Josiah already told you all about it. You can just do what he said. Support us for even $1. That's fine with us. Our intro music is by Mario Armstrong. Our outro music is by The Logical Spoon. And we'll see you next time.